Keanu adjusted his tie for the third time, not because it wasn't straight, but because his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Beside him, Alexandra's fingers traced invisible circles on his wrist, a quiet rhythm that said, "I know you, I'm here, breathe." The car slowed as they approached the premiere, the golden letters of waiting for Godot glowing ahead like some strange promise. Outside, cameras flashed in rapid bursts, soundless lightning in the tinted windows. For the world, this was just another red carpet, two famous people arriving at a long-awaited play. But inside that car, the air felt heavy with a different kind of weight, the kind that comes when the past still has questions you never answered. He watched the crowd through the glass, fans pressed against barriers, journalists fighting for position, people holding posters and old DVDs like talismans from another time. He'd gone to 1,000 premieres, posed for 1,000 photos, smiled through exhaustion and heartbreak and everything in between. Yet tonight his chest felt tight in a way he hadn't expected. This wasn't an action movie or a franchise. This was theater. This was Beckett. This was a story about waiting, waiting for meaning, for answers, for someone who might never come. And somewhere deep in him, that waiting still lived like a quiet ghost. "You're somewhere else," Alexandra said softly, her voice steady, her silver hair catching the dim interior light. She wasn't accusing him, she was observing the way she always did, seeing him, not the image of him. He tilted his head back against the seat. "I keep thinking about that rehearsal room in Toronto," he murmured. "The first time I tried to do Godot, I thought I understood the play. Turns out I didn't understand anything, not the text, not myself." A small smile passed over her lips. "Maybe that's the point of it," she said. "You're not supposed to understand everything, you just stand in it and keep going." Her words were gentle, but they hit something raw. "Back then," he said, "I walked out halfway through the run. I told everyone it was creative differences. Truth is, I was scared. I didn't think I was enough. Didn't think I could hold that kind of silence on stage. I left a lot of people hanging." The memory burned as he said it out loud. The director's face, stunned, the disappointed cast, the critics who called him unreliable and miscast. He'd gone back to Hollywood, to the comforting noise of stunts and gunfights and box office numbers. You could hide a lot of fear behind explosions. Alexandra listened without interrupting, her thumb now resting against the pulse in his wrist. She knew the broad strokes of that story, but not this, the shame that had never really left. "And tonight," she said quietly, "you're not the one on the stage, but it's still your waiting." The car stopped. A roar of voices flooded in as the door cracked open a few inches. The driver glanced back. "They're ready for you," he said gently, as if he could feel the tremor in the air. Keanu's first instinct was the familiar one, armor up. Put on the public face, the polite nod, the reserved smile. Give them what they came for and keep the rest buried. But Alexandra's hand was still on his, and under the hum of the crowd he could hear his own heartbeat, loud and insistent. He turned to her. "What if they still see that guy?" he asked. "The one who quit, who ran? What if this whole night is just pretending I became someone braver than I really am?" She didn't look away. "Maybe courage isn't about becoming someone else," she said. "Maybe it's showing up as exactly who you are and walking out there anyway." There was no glamour in her voice, no grand speech, just a quiet, persistent belief he'd learned to trust over the years. Alexandra had her own battlefield scars, projects that never sold, exhibitions that were called too strange, the endless whispers about their relationship. Through it all, she hadn't turned bitter. She'd turned kinder, more patient, more stubbornly hopeful. That was her rebellion. Outside, a security guard opened the door fully. The floodlights poured in harsh and bright. The roar became words. His name, her name, shouted again and again, blending into one relentless wave. For a second, Keanu stayed where he was, half in the car, half out, holding on to the edge of the leather seat as if it were some last grounding point in a life that was always on a moving track. Alexandra squeezed his hand once, then began to step out, the shimmer of her dress catching the light like liquid gold. She didn't pull him, didn't push him. She simply rose, shoulders back, gentle but unafraid. In that small act, he saw everything she was saying. We step into this together, or we don't step at all. But I'm not going to hide. He followed her out into the storm of flashes. Cameras crackled like distant thunder. Journalists called out questions that blurred into noise. He felt the old instinct kick in, scan the crowd, find exits, calculate angles. But then, over all the chaos, he heard a single voice, younger, almost trembling, cutting straight through the din. "Keanu," it cried, "please just one moment, it's about Godot." He turned, already expecting another autograph, another hurried picture. Instead, he saw a thin young man behind the barrier, clutching what looked like a worn, dog-eared script. The kid's eyes were wide, desperate, like this 1 second might change everything for him. Beside Keanu, a handler leaned in. "We're late," he whispered. "We really need to move." Keanu met Alexandra's gaze. Her eyes flicked from the young man to him, calm but searching. Under the lights, with the world watching, he felt the squeeze of two opposite forces. The polished schedule pulling him forward, and that trembling voice, tugging him back toward a moment that looked uncomfortably like his own past, waiting for an answer he'd once run away from. He took a single step toward the carpeted entrance, then stopped, heart thudding, caught between duty, fear, and the unexpected chance to face the very ghost he had never quite dared to name. Keanu's foot hovered over the carpet as if that one step would lock the whole night into place. The handlers were already motioning, the publicist's smile fixed but strained, yet the kid's voice kept echoing in his ears. "It's about Godot." The words were too sharp, too precise to ignore. For a heartbeat, the roar of the crowd thinned into a muffled hum, like sound underwater. He turned back. "Just a second," Keanu said over his shoulder, his tone quiet but firm. The handler hesitated, then nodded with the tight, resigned look of someone watching a schedule evaporate in real time. Alexandra didn't move ahead without him. Instead, she stepped slightly aside, giving him space, like she was opening a small doorway in the chaos. As he walked toward the barrier, the press surge shifted, cameras tracking him. Some shouted new questions, smelling a story. The kid with the script went pale, then flushed red, eyes darting between Keanu and the security guards who were already tensing. He looked like someone who had wanted this moment his whole life and regretted it the instant it started happening. Keanu stopped in front of him. Up close, the kid couldn't have been more than 20. His coat was too thin for the night air, his knuckles white around the script. There were ink marks all over the cover, notes, underlines, even a coffee stain like a small brown continent in the corner. "You said it was about Godot," Keanu said gently. "Talk to me." The boy swallowed. Sorry," he stammered. "I didn't think you'd actually, I mean you're late and there's cameras and—" "It's okay," Keanu cut in, voice low, steady. "Breathe, what's your name?" "Marco," he managed. I'm in theater school. Well, kind of, I'm on academic probation." He gave a shaky half-laugh, then seemed to realize he'd said too much. Keanu's eyes softened. "Academic probation's not a character flaw," he said. "What's going on?" Marco glanced at the security guards again, as if expecting to be dragged away at any second. Then he gripped the script tighter. "We're staging Waiting for Godot next month. I'm playing S-Dragon," he rushed out. "My professor says I don't get it, that I'm shallow, that this play is too big for me, and every time I try to do the lines, I feel like he's right, like I'm pretending to be someone who actually understands life, and I'm just—" His voice cracked. "I'm just a guy who can't even pass intro to dramatic literature." The words hit Keanu with uncomfortable precision. The insecurity, the self-doubt, the weight of one person's judgment settling into your bones and starting to sound like your own voice. The chorus of photographers behind him intensified, sensing emotion. This was the part the world loved to capture, the vulnerable fan, the gracious star. But for Keanu, the moment was anything but simple. "I heard about your Godot," Marco blurted, eyes searching his face. "How you left the production. My professor used it as an example of why some actors just aren't meant for certain roles. He said failure like that can follow you forever." His breath hitched. "And I thought if even you couldn't do it, what's the point of me even trying?" There it was, the ghost, dragged into the open under the floodlights. For a second, shame flared hot in Keanu's chest. Not because of the kid, but because the story had become that. A warning, a punchline, an anecdote about walking away. He remembered the director's quiet disappointment, the hushed conversations, the headlines. He told himself he'd made peace with it. But hearing it described to this young actor as a permanent stain, he felt something inside him stiffen in protest. Alexandra watched from a few steps back, her expression calm but intent. She knew this was not a fan interaction. This was a reckoning disguised as small talk. Keanu leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry as far to the waiting microphones. "Marco," he said, each word deliberate, "that professor of yours, he told you half a story." Marco blinked. "What do you mean?" "I did walk away," Keanu said. "That part's true. I was scared, overwhelmed, and I made a decision I'm not proud of. I hurt people I respected. That failure, yeah, it followed me, but not the way he told you." He paused, feeling the old wound and beneath it something more solid. "It followed me as a question. Are you going to keep running from the hard stuff, or are you going to learn how to stay?" Every director after that, every rehearsal where I wanted to bail, every time I thought, "I'm not enough," that night came back, not as a curse, as a choice I hadn't finished answering. Marco's eyes were shining now, confusion and hope wrestling across his face. "But you're you," he whispered. "You can say that now because you made it. I'm just some nobody who can't even find a decent monologue." Keanu shook his head slowly. "Fame doesn't erase fear, man. It just gives it better lighting." A faint, wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You know what I think makes you an actor? It's not how many people know your name. It's whether you're willing to stand there in front of strangers, feeling completely exposed, and stay anyway." Marco's lips trembled. "But what if I get it wrong?" he asked. "What if I ruin it?" "Then you'll join the club," Keanu said softly. "The we tried and messed up and kept going club, that's the only one worth being in." Behind them, a publicist coughed politely, a quiet reminder. Time was bleeding away. The premiere would not wait forever, no matter how poetic the night felt. Keanu glanced back at the carpet, then at Alexandra. She met his eyes and gave the slightest nod. "Finish this properly." Keanu turned back to Marco. "You have that script with you for a reason," he said. "You've probably been rehearsing on the bus, in your room, in the mirror, everywhere. You care enough to shout my name in front of all these people. That doesn't sound shallow to me." Marco looked down at the battered pages, then back up, voice barely audible. "What if my professor's right, that the play is too big for me, that I'm too small?" Keanu felt something hard and old inside him shift. Humanity wasn't in the polished answers, it was in the uncomfortable truth. "I'm going to tell you something I've never said on a red carpet," he replied quietly. "When I first did Godot, the play was too big for me. I thought I had to fill it with ideas, with meaning, with importance. I forgot that the only thing I really had to bring was myself, as honestly as I could. And when that felt like not enough, I ran. I let the fear decide." Marco's breath was uneven now, tears threatening. "So here's what you do," Keanu continued. "You go on that stage. You stand there as Marco, who's scared and on academic probation and thinks he might blow it. You let that guy say the lines. Don't pretend to be wiser than you are. Don't fake some grand understanding of life. Just be the person who's still waiting for answers, for courage, for whatever's next. That's S-Dragon. That's all he is. A man who keeps waiting and keeps showing up anyway." The boy's first tear slipped free, cutting a quick, bright line down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "And about your professor," Keanu added. "One day you might prove him wrong, or you might not. That's not the point. The point is, don't hand your whole story to someone who only knows one chapter of it." A hush had settled over the immediate crowd. Even the photographers were quieter, their flashes less aggressive, as if the rawness of the moment made them hesitate. Alexandra watched, chest tight with a kind of fierce tenderness. This stubborn, vulnerable kindness was the man she knew away from all of this. Keanu reached out his hand. Marco looked at it, startled, then shook it, his grip trembling. "You're not alone in this," Keanu said. "Every actor you admire has been exactly where you are, maybe not in the same shoes, but on the same ground. Fear doesn't disqualify you. It just means you're awake." Marco opened his mouth to respond, but his voice failed him. He nodded instead, clutching the script to his chest like it might steady his ribs. Security signaled that they needed to move. The spell of stillness began to crack. Keanu stepped back, ready to rejoin Alexandra, when Marco finally found his voice again, thin but urgent. "Wait," he called out, words tumbling over each other. There's one more thing." Keanu paused, turning under the lights that painted harsh angles across his face. The crowd seemed to lean in with him, sensing the fragile thread that still connected them. Marco swallowed hard, eyes locked on his. "My professor said," he whispered, "that some people aren't just wrong for a role, they're wrong for the calling. He told me I should rethink my whole life before I humiliate myself any further." His fingers dug into the script. "If you were me, would you quit, right now, before it gets worse?" The noise of the premiere swelled back up around them, but inside that single question, everything narrowed again. Keanu felt it land like a weight in his chest. Not theoretical, not distant, but knife-sharp and personal. Because he knew that wasn't just a fan asking a celebrity for advice. It was the same question he'd quietly been asking himself for years, in different words, on different nights. And tonight, on this glowing carpet in front of the world, he realized he couldn't dodge it anymore. Keanu didn't answer right away. The question hung there, fragile and heavy at the same time, like glass filled with lead. The crowd noise swirled around them, shutters clicking, people calling names, the muffled thump of music from inside the theater. But for a moment it all sounded far away, as if someone had closed a door around just the two of them. "If you were me, would you quit?" The words sank in deeper than Marco could have known. Keanu remembered nights alone in hotel rooms, staring at half-learned lines, wondering if he had already given the best he had to give. He remembered that Toronto dressing room, the unanswered knock on his door, the director's voice through the thin wood. "We can talk this out." And the way he'd stayed silent anyway. "No," Keanu said at last, his voice quiet but unmistakably firm. "I wouldn't quit." Marco flinched slightly, like he'd been holding his breath for a different answer, maybe an easier one. "But what if I'm just not built for this?" he asked. "Some people are strong enough to handle rejection and humiliation and being told they're not good enough. I'm not sure I am." Keanu studied him, seeing not just a trembling student but a younger version of himself, the man who'd believed that courage meant never feeling what Marco was feeling now. "Listen," he said, and his tone shifted, pulling in something raw and unvarnished. "No one is built for this. You shape yourself around it, slowly, clumsily, with a lot of wrong turns." He took a breath, feeling Alexandra's presence steady beside him even without looking at her. "When I walked away from Godot," he continued, "I told myself I was choosing sanity, that I was respecting my limits. But the truth, I wasn't protecting myself, I was protecting my image of myself. I was terrified of being seen failing at something serious, something that stripped away all the armor. So I ran before anyone could witness just how lost I felt." Marco's gaze didn't waver. The honesty drew him closer, like a hand offered on unstable ground. "I thought quitting would make the fear smaller," Keanu said. "But it did the opposite. It made it bigger because now it had proof I would listen to it. Every time I doubted myself after that, my fear said, 'Remember, you ran once. You'll run again.'" A flicker of grief crossed his features, not for the role he'd lost, but for the years spent negotiating with a voice that always whispered leave when things got hard. "So if you walk away now," he went on gently, "don't tell yourself it's because you're not good enough. Be honest, it would be because you're scared, and that's okay. Fear is human, but you have to decide one thing for yourself. Do you want fear to be accurate or in charge?" Marco's eyebrows pulled together, eyes shining again. "Those feel like the same thing," he admitted. "They're not," Keanu said softly. "Fear can be right about how hard something will be, how vulnerable you'll feel. It can warn you that you're walking into something that might hurt, but it doesn't get the final vote on who you are. You do." Behind them, a reporter called Alexandra's name, trying to draw her forward for individual photos. She gave a small, apologetic wave, then stayed rooted beside Keanu, the corners of her eyes tight with emotion. This wasn't PR. This was a man choosing which story to tell about himself in real time. "You asked if you should rethink your life," Keanu said, looking back at Marco. "Maybe you should, we all should sometimes, but don't do it from the doorway before you've even stepped all the way inside. Go through the rehearsal, do the performance. Let yourself stand in the light and the silence and the terror. Then decide." Marco's shoulders shook with a quiet, bitter laugh. "And if I freeze on stage," he whispered. "If I forget my lines, if my professor is right in front of everyone and I crash and burn?" Keanu considered the question, refusing to soften it with empty comfort. "Then you'll have your answer for this moment in your life," he said. Not forever, just now. Maybe you'll decide theater isn't your path, or maybe you'll wake up the next morning ashamed and shaking and realize you survived. And that surviving the worst-case scenario means you can try again. That's resilience. It's not glamorous, it's just continuing. Marco's hand loosened on the script by a fraction, like some inner knot had shifted, not undone but no longer strangling him. "You really think I should go through with it?" he asked. Keanu nodded slowly. "I think you owe it to the part of you that shouted my name tonight," he replied. "That part isn't ready to quit. It's scared, but it's not done." For a second, Marco simply looked at him, his eyes full of something fragile but fierce. Hope that hurt to hold, like it might cut his palms open if he squeezed too hard. Then another voice broke in from behind Keanu, a voice that always managed to find the thread between softness and steel. "And if you do fail," Alexandra said calmly, stepping a little closer, "it might be the best thing that ever happens to you." Marco blinked, startled by her directness. Even Keanu turned slightly, curious where she would go. "I had my first gallery show when I was 28, she continued, speaking to Marco but letting her words brush against Keanu too. "I poured everything into it. My savings, my time, my whole sense of self. I thought if it went badly, I would disappear. It did go badly. Barely anyone came. A critic wrote that my work felt confused, like the artist didn't trust her own ideas. I spent a week convinced I'd been exposed as a fraud." She paused, the memory flickering across her face but not owning her anymore. "But here's what happened next. Nothing. The world didn't end. My heart kept beating. I got up. I went back to the studio. And I realized that if I could survive that humiliation, it meant it no longer had total power over me. I could take risks because the worst had already happened and I was still here." Marco listened like someone hearing a foreign language. He desperately wanted to understand. "Your professor's words hurt because you gave them the power to define you," Alexandra said softly. "But they don't have to be your final sentence. They can just be one bad review of one early performance in a story that isn't finished yet." A ripple moved through the crowd closest to them. Some of the onlookers were no longer just watchers. They were leaning in, faces open, taken off guard by how personal the conversation had become. A woman in the second row wiped at her eyes without seeming to notice. "So," Alexandra went on, "ask yourself this instead. If you quit right now, will that feel like kindness to yourself, or a quiet kind of cruelty? Are you protecting your heart, or are you locking it in a box because you're afraid of what it might feel?" The boy's mouth opened, then closed again. He stared down at the script, thumb gently brushing the frayed edge, and when he spoke his voice was rough. I don't know," he admitted. "I thought quitting would be self-care, but now it just feels like hiding." Keanu felt a strange, familiar ache as he watched the kid struggle. How many times had he called running away a mature choice? How many times had he dressed fear up as wisdom? The premiere lights wavered slightly, haloing everything in a golden blur. "Then maybe," Keanu said, "your first brave act isn't nailing a performance. Maybe it's deciding not to hide, not yet." From inside the theater, a distant chime sounded over the speakers, the 5-minute call before curtain. The red carpet coordinator looked increasingly anxious. Time had thinned down to a narrow thread. Keanu knew they had to move. He also knew there was one last thing he had to say, for Marco, but also for himself. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone publicly," he said quietly. "I told everybody I left Godot because of creative differences, schedules, artistic vision, but the truth is I left because I didn't think I deserved to stand in that role. I thought Beckett belonged to actors who were more educated, more important. People who could talk about existentialism at dinner parties without feeling like imposters, so I let that story push me out." He swallowed, the admission stinging even now. "If I could go back in time, I wouldn't force myself to be brilliant. I'd just tell that younger version of me. You're allowed to be exactly where you are, confused, scared, trying, that's enough, stay." He held Marco's gaze, the words now a bridge between them. "I can't go back, but you're standing where I once stood, right between staying and leaving. So here's my selfish request, stay for both of us." Marco's lips parted, breath shaking visibly in the cold air. 2 silent tears rolled down his cheeks. "Oh, okay," he whispered. I'll do the play, I don't know how, and I'm still terrified, but I'll stay." A small, almost imperceptible smile ghosted across Keanu's face, a mixture of relief and something like redemption. He reached out and, without fanfare, pulled Marco into a brief, firm hug over the barrier. The crowd let out a soft, collective exhale, a sound somewhere between a cheer and a prayer. "Remember," Keanu murmured by his ear, "every time you want a bail, that's the exact moment the story gets interesting." He pulled back, gave the kid's shoulder a quick squeeze, and stepped away. Security gently guided Marco back as the tide of fans closed around him again, but the boy's posture was different now, still fragile, but a little less folded in on itself. Keanu turned toward the theater, the red carpet stretching ahead like a corridor of expectation. Alexandra moved to his side, and as they began to walk, the cameras went wild again, reclaiming the scene. Yet something had shifted in him. The lights felt less like interrogation and more like stage bulbs warming a space he might actually belong in. "You okay?" Alexandra asked under her breath, her smile outwardly serene as she posed, but her hand finding his for a brief, anchoring squeeze. He let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "I just told a stranger my biggest professional regret," he said. "On camera, on premiere night, so I have no idea what I am." She tilted her head toward him slightly. "Honest," she said, "which is terrifying and kind of beautiful." They moved together down the carpet, pausing for photos, answering questions in quick, practiced rhythms. The conversation with Marco still thrummed under Keanu's skin, but layered over it now was something unexpected. A lightness, as if by naming his failure out loud, he'd finally stopped dragging it around in the dark. Near the theater doors, a cluster of journalists waited with more serious expressions. Critics, theater columnists, people who still remembered the old headlines about the abandoned Godot. One of them, an older man with sharp features and a press badge from a respected paper, raised his hand. "Mr. Reeves," he called, voice carrying cleanly. "Given your history with waiting for Godot, do you feel any unfinished business with this play?" The question sliced through the air, precise and undeniable. Flashbulbs popped in a ragged staccato around them. Alexandra went very still beside him, watching his profile. "Unfinished business." Keanu felt every eye, every lens, every microphone tilting toward him, waiting. The safe move would be to laugh, dodge, turn it into a light anecdote, and let the night return to its comfortable script. But Marco's tear-streaked face swam up in his memory, along with his own words, "Stay. Stay for both of us." He cleared his throat, jaw tightening, not with anger this time, but with a decision. "Yes," he said slowly, his voice carrying farther than he expected. "I do." The journalist leaned forward, scenting something more than a soundbite. "And do you believe that business can ever really be resolved?" he pressed. "Or is certain failure permanent?" The crowd quieted again, the question hanging sharp as a blade. Keanu glanced up at the glowing marquee, at his own reflection caught in the tall glass doors nearby. A man older than the kid who'd once run, marked by time and loss and strange, improbable grace. Then he looked at Alexandra, letting himself draw strength from the steady, unflinching way she held his gaze. When he finally answered, his voice was low but unwavering. "I think," he said, "the only thing that makes failure permanent is when you stop walking toward the thing that scares you." A murmur rippled through the press line. The journalist opened his mouth to ask another question, but before he could, a stage manager hurried out from the theater's side door, looking flustered and anxious. "Mr. Reeves," she called, gesturing urgently. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation inside. They're asking for you specifically." Keanu blinked. "For me," he repeated, thrown. "Yes," she said, already stepping closer. "It's about the performance, the cast, something's gone wrong. They need to know if you're willing to help."